Holy camoles, you lucky devils. I think I'm on time. It's 7 o'clock. Well, let's get the ball rolling.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
You're in violation of secure communication procedures, Condor.
So we just went ahead and fixed the glitch.
There is no America. There is no democracy.
Our fifth objective, a new world order.
There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West.
Right-wing conspiracy.
What do you call it when the assassins accuse the assassin?
A new world order.
Thank you for plugging in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
Well, just a second there, Professor. We fixed the glitch.
I'm your host, Professor Thomas Henry Horan.
He reads everything.
Hello there, my beautiful, bountiful, bodacious boosters. You better believe he reads everything. That's why his eyes are always... That's why his eyes are so shifty. He's always reading things. He reads everything. So you don't have to. Then he reads it to you. So here we go. Are you ready? Are you ready? Some of you, it's been 5 years. The rest of you are probably lost. Be that as it may or may not be. Here's where it gets fun. I think we've cracked the murder of Cecilia Shepard. There will be more to come on that. Now we're going to crack the murder of Paul Stine. And it's going to prove you people right that there's, Manson's connected to Zodiac and Son of Sam. And I started this podcast to debunk some of that crap. Kind of build up my credibility a little bit. Now we've proven it. So you're starting right now. You're going to get everything, not just everything you deserve. You're going to get everything you've been asking for. You've been asking for it. For 5 years, you've been asking for it. And if you have not read this book, you need to read this book because I don't have time to turn this into videos. Maybe someday. The documentary on Peacock right now, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, they read the book and they went beyond it. So you need to read the book for this podcast and for that documentary, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer. By me, Professor Thomas Henry Horan. Okay? And they did a great job on the documentary, but you need to read the book. There was no Zodiac Killer. Those letters were a hoax of some bizarre hoax. Okay, so here we go. Now, not only going to crack the murder of Paul Stine, but tie it in with all of that stuff I made you sit through for the last 5 years. If you made it that far. All that stuff I made you sit through is now going to... When I realized those Zodiac letters were... This was a total accident, total fluke. Those Zodiac letters were a hoax of some kind. And Graysmith's book was a hoax that was based on a hoax, and he knew it was a hoax because he lied about it. Why would you lie about something if you thought it was real? So what the hell is going on? And when I realized that the guy who wrote the letters had been in the Philippine Scouts and all this other stuff, I instantly realized. But it took 5 years to show you guys enough of what I already knew. And then plus, you guys have taught me a lot, obviously, et cetera, et cetera. So, and people like Evan from Texas have done yeoman's work to help me. So when I say I, of course, I mean the royal we, have cracked the murder of Paul Stine. And but it's 5 years is all building up to these Easter eggs, which I'm going to lay on you over the next several weeks. Okay, I'll try to get this done by Labor Day. But you needed to see all that. Even if you didn't absorb all of it completely, don't worry about it. You're going to get it now. Here it is. You're going to get it. You've been asking for it, and now you're going to get it. Okay? The murder of Paul Lee Stine, born December 18th, 1939. December 18th is the same birthday as Arthur Lee Allen and Big Eddie Kemper. All born December the 18th. Different years. Paul Stine shot and killed in his cab. He'd been on duty for an hour, maybe? This was his second or third fare. He'd been to the airport or something. The cab is, there was a call from the citizens. Some kids right across the street. Like right across the street. The house right across the street. You look over the top of that cab. There's a house right there on the corner of Washington Street. And this is at Cherry on the other side. And they see what goes on after the shooting. They don't see the shooting. They see the aftermath of the shooting. This is Paul Stine, son of Milford and Audra T. Stine. Was he born in Tulare County? His folks came from Oklahoma. His folks were Okies from Oklahoma. Okay, his father was an Okie from Oklahoma. And they had a farm at Exeter, California. He grew up there. Paul definitely grew up there. But his parents got divorced, and his brother Joe grew up in Vallejo and then lived in Napa. We'll come back to that later when we look at suspects. But Paul lived with his mother in Exeter, California. He was murdered on Crowley Moss. Crowley Moss keeps cropping up in this crap. I had to admit, Crowley Moss kept cropping up in this crap. Read the book, Secret Agent 666. That reminds me, there's a documentary free on YouTube right now, free with ads, or, if you get premium. No ads. There's a documentary right now about the real Mecca, the search for Mecca. YouTube. About everything I just told you about. This guy's a historian. I've read about this stuff, and he came out with a video, or there's a documentary now. I'll put it in the comments later about Mecca did not exist at the time of Muhammad, and Mecca was at Petra, and that Muhammad was born at Petra, and that Muhammad was a company baby, basically. But this guy doesn't say it that way. But he proves that Mecca, the original place that they prayed to, was not at the Arabian village of Mecca. It was at Petra, just like I said. Is that Ralph Ellis? Is that, you know who I'm talking about? Okay. So, getting back to the topic at hand, Paul Stine is murdered on Crowley Moss. And Lino LaBianca, that's not a W, that's the symbol of Crowley's AA, Astrum Argentum, or whatever in the hell it supposedly was. And this was also poor Arliss Perry. Her body was found. Her legs were like this, and her jeans were laying on top of her. Well, from your point of view, laying on top of her legs, making the same symbol. Okay, and she was murdered October 1974. This is Lino LaBianca. So there's this Crowley crap linking these crimes together. Even though the phony, fake propaganda about the occult links was all bullshit, there are actual occult links between these murders, occultist links between these murders. Astrum Argentum, right? Silver Star. Well, the funny thing is, the mother of Joseph DeAngelo, who has been hung with all of the Golden State Killer and East Area Rapist crimes, his mother remarried and moved to Tulare County in 1965. Joseph DeAngelo would later get a job as a police officer in Exeter or Visalia, one of those two towns. But that's because his mother already lived there. She married a guy named Jack Bosenko Jr. And she turns out to be interesting. But here's Paul Stine, he was born in Tulare County. Shot to death on Crowley Moss, 1969. This is Paul working at the Visalia Grocery Getter or something, the Exeter Enterprise newspaper. Paul Stine was a cub reporter in his hometown before he went to college. When the Visalia Ransacker was active in his community, Paul Stine was working as a cub reporter, probably covering that story. That's one hell of a goddamn coincidence. And one of his playmates, he grew up a couple of houses away, and they went to high school together, very small town, was Oscar Clifton, who was a prime suspect for being the Golden State Killer for a while. And he had been convicted of murdering his wife. Paul Stine probably knew more about the Golden State Killer than anybody will ever know. But we'll never know that. But that alone would be a motive for his murder. And this, I think, is at the yearbook. But this was him as a reporter in his hometown newspaper. And that's him at prom, obviously. And not only that, but you know who else was living there in the early 1960s? Rodney Alcala's father died in Tulare County in 1962. So he'd been living there for a while. So Rodney had lived there for a while. Rodney Alcala, Rodrigo Alcala Bucor. His father, I don't remember his father's name right off the top of my head. They lived there. Raul Alcala Bucor. How's that for a coincidence, Mandrake? And Paul was a Unitarian? Services First Unitarian Church, 1187 Franklin Street. Cab driver and getting his PhD in journalism at San Francisco State University, where Sherry Joe Bates's fiance was taking freshman English composition. Could easily have had Paul Stine as his comp teacher or tutor. Easily could have known each other. Paul's mother, Audra, married Leroy James Harrison, May 31st, 1961. I don't think there was anything... wasn't anything really interesting about him. Ron Allen married Karen Long, who went to San Francisco State University at the same time. She was a student at San Francisco State University. They got married December the 18th, 1966. Ron Allen got married on his brother's birthday. And she was going to San Francisco State University at the exact same time as Paul Stine and Sherry Jo Bates' fiance. And there was somebody else going there. Somebody else was there at the same time, but got married on his brother's birthday. What? Got married on his brother's birthday? Well, bro, we were going to have a birthday party for you, but as you know, it's our wedding anniversary, so... Well, honey, I know it's our wedding anniversary, but it's my brother's birthday. Or Paul Stine's birthday, if you want to think of it that way. I hope you enjoyed that slide as much as I did. It's crazy. It's crazy. If you hadn't sat through the last 5 years, if I hadn't sat through the last 5 years, who would believe any of this? Who would believe any of it? Well, Paul's stepfather, Roy James Harrison, died October the 11th, 1968. How's that for a coincidence? After a long illness. Remember the code within the code? Remember the 408? There's a video on here. Okay. The anagram, and if you add the word victims to it, and it spells complete sentences. Remember all those complete sentences? There's no A, there's no U. Right? There's all these letters that aren't there, but you can spell all these. For example, I went BRS to meet hippie victim's sister. I went Blue Rock Springs Park to meet hippie victim's sister. Is that the person who was actually sitting in the front seat and Mike was already sitting in the back seat? I show hippie victim's sister better time. This is funny because the 408 came with those, 3 copies of the first letter, not Xerox copies, handwritten copies, first letter. Arrived August 1st. August 2nd, there's a newspaper article, please provide more information. So postmarked August 2nd is this long letter with a lot more information. It's almost like he was waiting for them to ask. And he mentions, dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. In answer to your asking for more details about the good times I have had in Vallejo, I shall be very happy to supply even more material. And this is where he proves that the letters are a hoax. Does that verify my hunch about the code within the code? I show hippie victim's sister better time. What about this? Best time is when I tie victims with ropes. Now, this would be predicting a murder that hasn't happened yet. The whole purpose of committing the murders is to get, and writing the letters, is to get the 408 printed on the front page of the newspapers. Well, if that message is so important, why put it in code? And if it has to be in code, why make it such an easy code to break? Besides the fact it's a fantastic publicity stunt for a story that will now run exclusively in the Chronicle, apart from that, what's the point? Unless it's the code within the code. And if the letters themselves prove that the letters are a hoax, what do the codes prove? That the letters are not a hoax? If the code within the code, if it's true, then now all of a sudden they prove it's not a hoax, because this is predicting a murder that, and matter of fact, it predicts the next murder, which he never writes a letter about. Is this why he never writes a letter about it? Because he predicted it in the code within the code? Not that he would ever think anybody would crack the code within the code, although he sends in clues about the code within the code. But he could show this to somebody. I predicted a murder before it happened, so I really am the Zodiac, or I really represent the Zodiac, or whatever. I just think it's weird that there are some other complete sentences, and they're the kinds of things that you would think he would put in letters like this, but why put them in code? He's saying things like, he's talking about biting people, right? And he's making crude remarks about the victims, the female victims. I'm not going to show you those because I'm not even sure this is 100% or even 0% right. But it seems like he predicted. Like, here's a verification. I show hippie victim sister better time. Best time, right? And in the letter, he mentions the good times I have had in Vallejo. And he mentions good times a couple of other times. Is he dropping hints about the code within the code? Well, here's something funny about the Paul Stine murder. Keith Power, the most respectable reporter at the Chronicle, wrote some articles, but with his byline, which is not an honor, the newspaper editor saying, I don't take responsibility for this article. He's writing articles about Zodiac. In the meantime, I'll show you this later, Paul Avery's writing articles debunking Zodiac. But here's Keith Power. Bay Killer shrinking timetable, blah, blah, blah. This is Friday, October the 17th, 1969. Astrologer joins hunt for killer by Keith Power. Friday, October 17th. When he was picked up by the cab driver about 9:30 p.m. Saturday at Geary and Mason Streets, Stine noted the destination on his waybill as Washington and Maple Streets. Why is he saying this? The murder took place at Washington and Cherry. The murder took place at Washington and Cherry, as acknowledged by Keith Power. The letter that came in October 13th, I'm going to go into much more detail about the letter. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. But the murder took place at Washington and Cherry. Why would this letter say Washington and Maple? Did he write the letter before the murder happened? There's a much more bizarre possible explanation. When you find out who actually killed Paul Stine, all of a sudden this makes sense. But why would Keith Power make up a lie to try to verify a Zodiac letter? And how do I know it's a lie? You need to read this book. But to make a long story short, how did Keith Power know what the trip sheet said? Police didn't find the trip sheet in the cab. It's not in the inventory of items taken from the cab, and it's not. There was a documentary made in 1998, and they got to go in the evidence room, and they took all the evidence out of the evidence box, all of it. The bloody clothing, everything was taken out. The gloves, everything was taken out. There was no. The trip sheet is a manila envelope. I forgot. We're going to get into this when we get into the bloody shirt. The trip sheet. And we're going to get into evidence tampering in the Stine case. But to make a long story short, the police never found the trip sheet. For one thing, they had to backtrack from the meter readings, and why would they do that if they had the trip sheet? The trip sheet is a manila envelope where you turn in your money at the end of the night. It's got all your trips logged on it. They never found that. It would have been on a clipboard on the dashboard. Somebody reached in and took it at some point. Well, if the killer took it, how did Keith Power know what was on it? If the police did not find the trip sheet, how did Keith Power know what was written on it? It's a very simple question. And I got him on the phone, and I asked him about it, and he said he doesn't remember. And he's in his 80s, and maybe he does. He was 81 when I talked to him. Maybe he doesn't remember. But it's the biggest case, it's the biggest story he ever wrote about was Zodiac, ever. And he got the information that confirmed that one of Zodiac's mistakes was actually true information. Read this book. The Zodiac letters are filled with wrong information, not correct information. They're filled with wrong information. Just exactly like the Manson family confessions are filled with wrong information. But this is important because either Keith Power lied, Keith Power was lied to, but this is the second time. I'm going to go over the letters in great detail when I show you who wrote the letters. But in the first couple of letters, the funny thing is there's a Chronicle reporter. Now, this Chronicle reporter didn't get a byline. A Chronicle reporter had a copy of Richard Hoffman's report from July 5th, 1969, the night Darlene was shot and Mike was shot. A reporter from the Chronicle had a copy of that report that night, and Zodiac had a copy of that report. Here, Zodiac had a copy of Paul Stine's trip sheet, and Keith Power had a copy of Paul Stine's trip sheet, a reporter for the Chronicle. That's an amazing coincidence of coincidences right there. How do I know the police didn't have it? Well, for one thing, on October 23rd, the police were looking on Nob Hill. The search also took police to Nob Hill, where the Fairmont Hotel became involved again in the manhunt. This was because cabbie Paul Stine is believed to have picked up his fare on a street near the famed hotel. That's way up at the top of Nob Hill. That's not in front of the Pinecrest Diner at Mason and Gary. The police never found the trip sheet. How did Keith Power know what was on it? And if Keith Power lied, why is Keith Power lying to try to bolster the authenticity of the Zodiac letters? And why is Robert Graysmith forging Zodiac letters? Well, here's the Pinecrest Diner. This phone was brand new when they flew me out there to start shooting. And I went to the Pinecrest on their nickel. They were very nice to me. And I did the buttons, and I walked in from the sunshine. I had my sunglasses on, and so this is it. This is my only footage from inside the Pinecrest. Look how tiny it is. It's not been remodeled. This is how it looked in 1969. They keep it very clean. It's very nice. The service is outstanding. The food was outstanding. It's just diner food. I got corned beef hash and eggs over easy, It's wonderful. But that was the only shot I got from inside. Here is outside. Here is your faithful reporter reporting on the scene, taking a break from shooting the NBC Universal documentary miniseries, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer. Now, so I'm standing in front of the intersection. The Pinecrest Diner had just opened in the spring of 1969. That's on the southwest corner of Mason and Gary. Okay? That's the Pinecrest. I'm standing on the corner. The owners and most of the staff were Cypriot Christians who were refugees from the 6 Days War, all this other turmoil that's going on in the Middle East. Paul Avery, Robert Graysmith, both arrived at the Chronicle around May of 1969, and the Pinecrest opened in May of 1969. It was brand new. And I thought I had footage, and it's It was the first place I went. If you go 4 blocks to the right in this video, if you go 4 blocks back up Geary, you come to Frank Kosciuszko's coffee shop. That was Darlene Farron's uncle, Frank Kosciuszko's coffee shop. That was just 4 blocks to the right. And if cops had retraced the meter readings on Stine's meter and decided that he'd picked up his fare 4 blocks north of the Pinecrest, maybe he actually picked him up 4 blocks east of the Pinecrest. But we'll never know, because we'll never know if Keith Power told the truth or not, because he said he doesn't remember. How did you get a copy? How did Keith Power know what was on the trip sheet if the police didn't? But Zodiac did. If Keith Power's not the Zodiac, how is any of this possible? Why does this matter? According to the... Did you catch the... Let me play this again. Now, on this side of the intersection, the Pinecrest Diner had just opened in the spring of 1969. The owners and most of the staff were Cypriot Christians who were refugees from the 6 Days War, all this other turmoil that's going on in the Middle East. Yeah, I think the next... So according to the witnesses who saw the killer go through the pockets and wipe down the cab, appeared to be wiping fingerprints on the interior of the cab, leaning over the victim to the driver's compartment. The suspect then exited the cab by the passenger side front door, also wiping with a white rag, possibly a handkerchief or a piece of the shirt. The suspect then walked around the cab to the driver's side and proceeded to wipe the exterior of the left door area. So he must have gotten in on the driver's side rear door. The suspect then fled. Because why would he wipe down the door handle of the driver's door? Why would he do that? And he didn't, by the way. But the both rear doors and the passenger front door, he stopped and wiped off the door handles. So he got in on the driver's side rear, got out on the passenger side rear, got in the front passenger side, messed around with the body, got the wallet, got his pieces of shirt, and then left. Are you with me? So if he was picked up in front of Mason and Geary, according to the witnesses, Stine's killer wiped the fingerprints from the left rear door handle. That means he got in on the left-hand side. Right? So if there's any truth to Keith Power... So now I'm a half a block north on Nob Hill, and you turn around... Like you would see Stine's cab go by and then make a right-hand turn on Geary in front of the Pinecrest. Okay, here you go. Our story in the Chronicle, Paul Stine drove his cab down Nob Hill, down Mason Street, which is a one-way street. When he got to Geary, he started to make a right-hand turn. That's the corner right there. And his killer stepped out from the corner, probably from in front of the Pinecrest, flagged him down, and got into the cab through the left rear door. Okay, so I'll play that one more time in full screen so you can see it. So, if there's any truth to Keith Power's story in the Chronicle, Paul Stine drove his cab down Nob Hill, down Mason Street, which is a one-way street. When he got to Geary, he started to make a right-hand turn, and his killer stepped out from the corner, probably from in front of the Pinecrest, flagged him down, and got into the cab through the left rear door. Okay, did you follow that? You saw the cars turning right? That would be Paul Stine, and he would stop and pick up his killer on that opposite corner, probably in front of the Pinecrest. Okay, here's another part of the code within the code. Received August 1st, 1969. This time, I owe Pinecrest victim's shirt. We tie his Pinecrest victim's shirt to me. That's a lot of very impressive sentences that might be predicting murders that haven't happened. The letters prove the letters are a hoax. Does the code prove the code is not a hoax? Does it predict 2 murders? And this is a very specific murder that will take place and have something to do with the Pinecrest? The Pinecrest just opened in May of 1969. Nothing was named Pinecrest in San Francisco until the Pinecrest Diner. It's not like on Pinecrest Alley or something like that. There's nothing else called Pinecrest. Nothing. This time I owe Pinecrest victim's shirt. We tie his Pinecrest victim shirt to me. And that is exactly what Zodiac did. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. And according to the Chronicle, there was in fact a blood-stained piece of shirt included in the envelope that this letter came in. And that was handed over to police and verified by police laboratory technicians. There's a photograph of it on the front page of the Chronicle. Laboratory technician verifying it is a piece of Paul Stine's shirt. Why does he have to send in a bloody piece of shirt? To prove this, I thought Keith Power proved it. And why would Keith Power have to make up a lie to cover up the error of Washington and Maple Street? Why would he have to do that if the shirt proves that it came from the killer? There are all kinds of explanations for this, but there's a very simple one. There's a very, very, very simple one. This letter is a hoax of some kind. Somebody snatched the trip sheet before the crime scene technicians came. The cab was towed to the parking garage at the brand new Hall of Justice, the public parking garage. There was no private area. It was a public parking garage. Around 1:30 a.m. At 5:30 a.m., the technicians came on duty and went out there to process the cab. During the night, somebody opened up that driver's side door and wrapped their left hand around because the window was rolled down, and leaned in and took the clipboard and the trip sheet off the dashboard and closed the door. They left their fingerprints, not bloody fingerprints, fingerprints over tiny droplets of dried blood from where Paul Stine got shot in the head. Somebody took the trip sheet. Was it Keith Power? I don't think so. He had a pretty good rep. I think it was Robert Graysmith. Moonlighting. Because the Chronicle was a union shop and he was not allowed to write articles. He worked in the production department. He'd be time carded if he had an article published. I think it was Robert Graysmith. How did Zodiac know what was on the trip sheet if the cops didn't? How did Keith Power know something Zodiac knew, but the cops didn't know? I will state some facts only I and the police know, not only I and Keith Power know. What is going on here? This time, I owe Pinecrest victim's shirt. We tie his Pinecrest victim's shirt to me. Who's we? Keith Power? Robert Graysmith? Now, here's where it gets interesting. P. Stine, C. Rob Smith II with teen victims. What? There's no A and there's no U and there's no L. So you can't spell out Paul Stine. It is impossible. But you can spell out P. Stine, C. Rob Smith II. Robert Graysmith's real name is Robert Smith II. Forget Robert Emmett the hippie. It actually spells out Robert Smith II with the word "the" spelled out and the 2 I's. Robert Smith II. How come Robert Graysmith never noticed his own name was it a possible solution to the anagram? How come he never noticed that? P. Stine, C. Rob Smith II with teen victims. There's multiple variations of the sentence. Teen victim, C. Rob Smith II with Paul Stine. We have not only a prediction of a murder by name, we have a motive that is tied to the first 2 Zodiac murders. How did they know in advance that he would pick up his killer in front of the Pinecrest? Because here's where it gets interesting. This murder is totally different from the other Zodiac murders. This is not a case of the victims being someplace and the murderer arrives and kills them. This is supposedly what happens to David and Betty Lou. This is supposedly what happens to Mike and Darlene. This is supposedly what happens to Brian and Cecilia. The victims arrive at an isolated location. The killer just randomly checks his locations and murders somebody. Not this one. This one, the victim picks up the killer and drives him to the crime scene. And then there's confusion about where the crime scene is, or it's supposed to be. Was it planned to pick up, that Paul Stine would pick up the Zodiac killer in front of the Pinecrest Diner and drive him to Washington and Maple Street? And something, maybe they saw somebody walking their dog and they had to go on another block. But did he already write the letter? Because the letter went out really fast. And the guy who wrote the letters lived in Napa County. Did he write the letter in advance and give it to the killer, and the killer just tore off a piece of the shirt and stuck it in the envelope that was already stamped and addressed, and all he had to do was commit the murder and tear off a piece of shirt? Teen victims see Rob Smith II with Paul Stine, because Rob Smith II was a wannabe investigative reporter. He's always admitted that. And he would moonlight, hanging around. He used to when he worked at the Oakland Tribune when he was going to college at the California College of Arts and Crafts, which was one of the best art schools in the world. When he was going to school there, he made friends with Bob Pop, a Chronicle reporter who covered the Oakland Police Department. Graysmith lies about this in his book. Why would he lie about that? Why would he lie about Bob Pop? But Bob Pop was the greatest investigative reporter. He was an honorary cop. He cracked some cases, and Graysmith worshipped him. So when Graysmith got the job at the Chronicle, he starts hanging around the San Francisco Police Department. And he'd be hanging out with another rookie wannabe reporter, Paul Stine. He sure would. I see Rob Smith with teen victims at Pier 1. Darlene was known to frequent that Pier 1 hippie supply store. Her friend said she used to go to Pier 1 all the time. I, Zodiac, see Rob Smith with teen victims at Pier 1. Pier 1 wasn't that far from Darlene's uncle's coffee shop. That's why she went there all the time. Now, about that bloody shirt. I'm Professor Thomas Henry Horan, asking you to please stay plugged in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
He reads everything.
You better bet your bippies he reads everything. Okay, how's that? Short, sweet, and to the point? And I'll be back at you real soon. This will take several episodes, but it's about to get fun, I promise. So thank you guys for hanging in there. Thanks for staying plugged in. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Please spay and neuter your cannibals. And please stay plugged in to the Stones Unturned podcast.